Green New Deal or Green Raw Deal? We're about to find out. I'm here with Drake Lundstrom. He is researcher for the popular YouTube channel Freedom Toons, really great cartoons, love that channel, and a contributor at actualanarchy.com. Drake, thanks for coming on the Scottish Liberty podcast.
My pleasure.
Okay, good to have you. So why don't you just, before we launch into exploring the Green New Deal, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself and your background, how you came to be a researcher from Freedom Toons and what you're into these days?
So I'm kind of the typical story of found a libertarian group in college, and I'm an engineer by trade, but I don't like losing arguments.
Right.
So I ended up just studying more than everyone else, and we kept going on the debate stage because we set them up at college. And just because I couldn't stand losing, I went through the whole archives of Tom Woods' podcast and Part of the Problem and Jason Stapleton and the rest. And now I know too many facts for my own good. I became
Perfect
a
for being a researcher.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what happened. Is Freedom Tunes does a monthly hangout, or even more than monthly, with his Patreons, and I was just on the hangout, and a topic came up, and I just dropped fact after fact, and like started putting links in the chat, and he wanted a copy of like the links afterwards, and then he was like, "Oh, and this other question," and then snowballed, and now I help out with researching because I enjoy doing it. And then I occasionally write articles for Actual Anarchy for the same reason. I've been on their podcast once or twice. It's so far buried, you probably can't find it. But I gave a bit of a drunken interview about how Sharknado is the fourth most libertarian movie ever.
Sharknado, the fourth. I love it.
Yep.
Great. So I don't know if that story of finding a libertarian college group is that typical, even though you said it's typical. Were you being ironic?
Um, I'll, at least in the US, you run into a lot of them because the Ron Paul movement was really big on college campuses. So it kind of varies by age, but a lot of people found Ron Paul on college campuses and then kind of went from there. And then all of the Ron Paul students for Ron Paul turned into Young Americans for Liberty, and then there's Young Americans for Freedom and a couple others. So it's not the most common origin story, but it's a relatively common one.
Okay, cool. That's good to know. So you have been researching the Green New Deal, and I want to put that massive brain of yours to use because it was a shame if you condensed all your findings into a 3.5 minute amusing clickbait cartoon, and we weren't able to utilize the full span of what you've accomplished in your reading. So, for those who don't know that much about it, why don't we? Because sometimes I myself, like, I know something's going on, but I don't go out the way to research it too deeply because it's opportunity cost, man. I can't know everything
Yeah.
about everything, though I try damn hard. Um, so why don't you tell us a little bit about the Green New Deal, its background, when did this idea spring up, and what is it?
So the Green New Deal as a policy proposal has been around for quite a long time. It's a plank of the Green Party platform. There's a couple different versions that have been floated for a while. And in Obama's 2008 stimulus package, he put maybe $90 billion towards investment in green energy. There's some people calling that a Green New Deal at the time. It's been around for a while, and it's really come back into limelight with Alexandria Ocasio Cortez, AOC. She's really jumped on the hill and started pushing for it and just ramming it down other Democrats' throats. There's some like really awful videos of her sending legions of like small children to interview. I believe is it Maxine Water? There was some Democratic congressperson that had just a horde of little children saying, "We're the faces of the people, like we're the faces of the people that will suffer if you don't pass the Green New Deal right now." But the bill itself, it's not really it's not really enforceable legislation. It's a resolution, so it does not actually require any action to be taken. It's more of kind of a wish list. This is our goal that will be used to justify future policies. And it's been attacked by a lot of people. But I do. All right, sorry. Did you have something to chime in?
No, I was just saying, okay, so we're going to get into the reads a little bit more about that. And just obviously, it's named after the New Deal where FDR, the president, I guess, well, why don't you explain the parallel?
Yeah. Although, and I do want to say one fast thing with it first. A lot of people, when they're referencing the Green New Deal, talk about a set of FAQs and a summary that was released about it. The FAQs and summary were a bit insane to the point that anyone could tear them down. It said stuff like, we want to ban all cows and airplanes within 10 years, and we want to, what else was there? We should give welfare to anyone unable or unwilling to
Yeah,
work.
yeah, yeah, and that
Just,
unwilling to work got
yeah,
attracted
full of
attention even from,
nonsense.
yeah, yeah. So you're saying that is that document, that FAQ is probably a straw man. We want to actually look at the most plausible case of a Green New Deal and
Yep.
not make it too easy for ourselves. Well, I mean, we're already coming out in prejudice against it, I guess. But
Yeah.
and I
And
should say, one of my most popular podcasts ever is called something like "Only Capitalism Can Save the Planet. Socialism Will Destroy the Earth." When I went very deeply into um, free market environmentalism, so it's not out of hatred of the planet that we are going to critique the Green New Deal. I should add. Um, but I just wanted to, so the New Deal was massive government program in America where the government spent tons of money in the thought that this would take America out of the Great Depression. Is that's the highlight? Is there anything you would like to add to that?
So the New Deal was claimed to take America out of the Great Depression. It utterly failed, just catastrophic failure. There's been some recent evaluations showing that the Depression would have ended in, I think it was 1933 or sorry, 1936 or so without the New Deal, and it ended up going all the way into the early 40s.
Yes,
Just
but it's taught
abysmal
in
failure.
school. It's taught in school even officially that officially the New Deal ended the Great Depression. This is like it was Keynes gave the justification for this, the idea that the government can spend money and that will stimulate the economy. And the reason why I mention that is the idea of this Green New Deal is no doubt that we can the government can create green jobs. Why doesn't the government everyone loves the planet, so why doesn't the government chuck lots of money at renewables, for example, and that's going to create jobs? Of course, money never comes out of thin air. There's, broadly speaking, three ways that the government can attain money. That is to tax people, and obviously if you tax people to pay for the Green New Deal, then those people aren't spending that money creating jobs. So there's going to be an opportunity cost there. If you print money, that devalues the currency so that the money that everyone has um, is going to not go as far. So that's also in a way, in a roundabout way, is going to inhibit job growth because everything's going to be more expensive. So, and then the final way is, of course, to spend into debt. When you do that, then you're eating up the pool of money available for banks to lend to businesses and things like that to grow their businesses because it becomes more lucrative to lend that money to the government than to lend it to the private sector, thus also inhibiting job growth. And these are three of the reasons why uh, for a quick recap, for in case anyone was needed a recap on why more government spending will not create more jobs. It might create different jobs, but it certainly won't create more jobs.
And it's important to note, so the Keynesian theory says that you should have stimulus spending when the economy is running, like not running hot, when it's kind of cooled down and there's not enough jobs available and things aren't doing too well and need like a jump start.
Right.
It, bit of a bad summary since I don't really believe in their
Yes, yes.
theory.
So I mean, if we were to be very charitable to Keynes, we might even say that were he alive today, he might be utterly appalled at what governments have done in the name of his theories. He might not have even agreed with the way that his theories have been applied or used to justify government actions. You know, he was for a mixed economy. He wasn't a pure socialist. So another point that I should really mention about the economic stimulus. Damn, it was on my lips when you were talking. You talk for a while. I'm sure it'll come back to me.
Okay. But I was going to say, so right now the US unemployment rate is at something like 3 or 4%. There is no slack in the job market. Even from the most diehard Keynesian point of view, having a Green New Deal right now makes no economic sense. And
Okay.
you have people that are pushing it and saying it'll help the economy create all these jobs, but a normal Keynesian would say you can only create jobs when people aren't already working.
Right.
Everyone's already working. Like even a Keynesian would have to disagree with this plan.
Right, okay. So I remembered what I was going to say. It's a little understood. I don't hear libertarians explain it enough or clearly enough to my satisfaction. So I want to explain another fallacy of this idea that if the economy is taking a tanking, the government should create jobs. And I want to just use a metaphor or an example, right? Supposing we have the car industry and the factories are closing down because there's not enough demand for cars. And the demand for cars is just a metaphor for demands on all goods and services in the economy in this explanation, right? The reason why those aren't selling is because, well, people don't have enough money for them, but they've already got enough cars. They don't want them. They might not have figured out what they do want yet. So what would happen on a free market is some of the car factories will close down uh, so that the demand for cars so the supply for cars will match the demand for cars approximately. And that's good because those factories can be sold onto someone that can do something good with them. The machines will have to be repurposed to be used to manufacture other goods that people don't want. Now, my kind of analogy is to say, now imagine the government stimulates the economy. So people have got more money around and they think, okay, yeah, let's go out and buy a few cars. Now, in the short term, the car industry seems to be doing much better than it was. Oh, good, look, the economic stimulus is working. But what actually happens is that when people realize that there's not actually as much resources in the economy as there is money because of the deficit spending or the printing of money to create this extra demand for cars, the number of that not only will people not want cars, but a whole bunch of people have just gone out and bought them, so they won't be needing another one for 5 to 10 years. And instead of slowly closing down one at a time, a whole bunch of car factories will have to close down all at once because of this adjustment. And all of these people working in car manufacturing will be thrown out into the job market at the same time, making it more difficult for them to find positions because there's more people in a similar position to them to compete with. So it's like the proverbial cocaine binge and then the following
Yeah, and that's what a lot of
hangover,
people
you know.
miss is that the recession is actually a good thing. It's very painful, but it's the economy kind of cleaning up and reallocated. Like 2008, we realized no, everyone already has 3 houses they're flipping. We don't need to
Right,
build any more houses. Let's have people stop being house builders and start building, like, I don't know, iPhones and burritos.
right, okay.
There's a
Well,
neat video, if you want to link it, from Learn Liberty that explains Austrian business cycle theory, which is kind of that in like 4.5 minutes. Sorry, I'll send you the links afterwards to put on if you
okay,
want to put
I'll
them in the
put it
show
in the video
notes.
description on
Yeah,
YouTube. Okay,
perfect.
so that's enough of a primer. Let's get
Hmm.
into the Green New Deal. So,
for the Green New Deal, there's a first quick lesson in case someone is not that experienced with it. When you're reading a bill, the first section of the bill, every line is going to start with whereas, and that section of the bill is essentially just saying these are the background facts, this is the current situation and how things work, to kind of define the rest of the bill. And then part of the way through the bill, it's going to switch and say resolved, and from there on it's going to give the actual like what they want done. And just the reason I originally reached out to Antony is that there is so much nonsense in this bill that it was impossible to create a distilled summary refutation. I mean, just to give you some example, this bill, in there's the background section, it got into the wage gap. It got into the incorrect idea that there's a trending like wage stagnation among manufacturing class workers in the U.S. It got into racial inequalities. It hit every single leftist issue talking point in one
it's
document.
not just a Green New Deal, it's the idea that the government spending can be used to address a whole shopping list of issues which are perceived to be important by the groups pushing it. Right, so it's like we're going to use the government to remake society in the image of how we think that society should be imaged. I mean, some people believe that's the function of government. Some people think the purpose of the government is to, do this, basically engineer society to be better. So it's not surprising in a way. Like people would say, regular people, not even people on the far left, what's the function of government? Oh, to make society more fair, and to not just to pass laws, but to try and engineer society in a better way.
And so, yeah, exactly what Antony said. It's just, and especially, and this point's been said by a few other people, but it's worth making again. AOC is claiming that if you do not fix this problems within 10 to 12 years, it will be irreversible. The world will be permanently down a dangerous path. And yet she's spending all this time talking about like gender equality. It's if there was an asteroid heading towards Earth, you wouldn't like, oh, we need to fix this asteroid and increase minimum wage and do whatever else. It'd be fix the asteroid first, figure out gender equality later, and they just don't act like it. They act like it's the end of the world, and also like it's just a regular old day all the time you could want.
This is any crisis can be used by anyone on any wing of the political spectrum as the next excuse to push through their shopping list. I mean, we remember under the Bush era, 9/11 was exploited to create a surveillance state and obviously launch the war on terror. And it seems to be a pattern. So, the progressive era, I think the same, the New Deal, basically, the crisis of the Great Depression was leveraged to get through a whole bunch of stuff that they would have wanted anyway, perhaps, and arguably the First and Second World War too.
And global warming has definitely been used as that crisis to leverage it. I mean, I'm not going to go much into the theory of global warming. I know episode 14 of the Scottish Liberty podcast did that in some depth, but they're not bringing up even in the Green New Deal. They're saying that anything above 1.5 degrees Celsius increase from pre-industrial levels will be catastrophic and dangerous, which is what the IPCC UN consensus document is currently saying. But even if you look at people that completely agree with global warming, like the recent Nobel laureate, I cannot remember his name. It was the most recent Nobel Prize in Economics was awarded for a climate model that was looking at what will happen with global warming and how much and how dangerous it is. And have his name in a second.
Well,
William
just
Nordhaus, that was the winner. His model was selected for Nobel Prize, and it stated anything under any policy that will keep warming under 3.5 degrees Celsius from pre-industrial levels will cause dramatically more harm than doing nothing. He
wow, that's
said,
amazing.
yeah, no, he said that the 1.5 degrees Celsius target that the Green New Deal and the UN is targeting would cost the world economy roughly $14 trillion on net from doing nothing. That doing nothing would be better than the Green New Deal. Among economists and people that realize that stopping the use of reliable, efficient fuel has cost, even if you agree fully with the most horrific projections of global warming, it's still not necessarily a good idea to do these drastic measures that will reduce the living standards of everyone, especially hurting the third world and people in absolute poverty.
Right, and what kind of percentage of carbon emissions is America responsible for anyway?
America's historically responsible for, I believe it's 30% of total historical emissions. But we're relatively a much smaller amount now, and going forward, the United States is already nearly the point of cutting our carbon emissions year over year, and it's really groups people like India and China that are the
Yes.
large emitters right now.
Right, and there are places that desperately need it because there's still a lot of poverty there despite progress being made. And not a lot of people know this, but see that like the most affluent billion people in the world consume half of the resources, and the next billion consume 25%. So you could get the the poorest 2 billion people in the world up to the living standards of the third poorest billion or even the fourth poorest billion with very little environmental impact at all. So I just want to throw that out because people don't know it. Another thing is with the adoption of government spending for environmental ends, supposing they do spend a trillion subsidizing solar panels, and then 2 years later, someone brings out a slightly better solar panel. That just meant they incredibly inefficiently spent $1 trillion. Do you know what I mean? I know it's an extreme example, but it's just the principle. The great thing about the market is people adopt things as they actually become viable to them. And I reckon it's going to be something like solar paneled roof tiles that are going to make the big change. Because if people can actually make money from having tiles on the roof when the technology gets there, it'll be like the internet. 1 year, hardly anyone has it. 5 years later, almost everyone has it. 10 years later, almost everyone has it. So it's really, I think technology is going to have to deliver the solution to emissions if one is necessary. And the problem, a lot of green people or leftists will say, well, why doesn't the government subsidize the development of those technologies? Actually, that's a disincentive to innovate because by subsidizing poor technology, what you're doing is you're making something that wouldn't otherwise be marketable, and therefore the people who are developing those technologies don't actually have the match under their ass to bring it up to scratch so that people actually want to buy it by innovating.
And I would disagree a little bit just in kind of how you worded it. The
Sure,
benefit of capitalism, it isn't that people will start using technology as it comes out. The benefit is some people will use the technology before it's ready. They'll start using it and we can see what fails.
that's
I mean,
good.
there's still
That's good.
people
Yeah.
now that don't even have laptops and they're doing
Yes.
just fine. And also, what you run into is the way government funds science just doesn't conform to how science actually works. There's a lot of research showing that the groups of scientists that are actually innovative and change the world are smaller teams. Larger teams take ideas already created and figure out how to best implement and kind of solidify the base of the idea. There's history of private companies being much more generous in funding science. And if you look at something like, it's an easy example would be medical research. We don't know what the correct theory and research is. We should be looking simultaneously, does marijuana cause cancer and does marijuana cure cancer? There's contradictory, we have to search every contradictory path. And if you're a politician, imagine trying to explain to your constituents, we just gave $1 million to a study seeing if marijuana causes cancer, another million to a study seeing if they cure cancer. You're going to look like an idiot because scientists should be left to the scientists. It shouldn't be funded by random people in the population that are going to be funding projects that don't make any sense.
Right, and so what you're saying is regarding capitalism is the great thing about the market is ideas get tested on the small scale, and if they fail to deliver, well, people might buy something stupid once, but they're unlikely to keep on buying it. They'll also likely tell their friends, oh yeah, I got that solar paneled phone charger, but it was a complete waste of time. It didn't generate enough energy to charge my phone. In fact, it probably took more resources to manufacture it than I'll ever save using it, right? So whereas the problem is with government mandates, some egghead who thinks they know everything is going to roll out that program to everyone in the whole nation, and next thing you'll find out that the panels were the wrong size to fit the Lord knows it's happened so many times
There's a
before.
good example of what happened. So the biggest problem with wind and solar is intermittency.
Sure.
Essentially, it's really hard to store energy, and you don't have energy when you need it. There was, I believe, Alex Epstein from the Center of Industrial Progress did a back of the envelope calculation. Enough batteries to just store the power the world uses in one day, because there's some days where it's rainy all day, you don't get sun. Just the batteries alone, not even the power transfer requirements to store that energy, would cost at least $80 trillion.
Right.
And we already have fossil fuels, uranium, which are nature-made, concentrated, reliable energy sources that are easy to access. And when you remove the intermittent sources, it's incredibly harmful to the economy. Germany right now, they had a very strong push for wind and solar renewable energy, and it has destroyed their energy sector. Energy prices have tripled in the past couple of decades there. They had to create a word for energy poverty. There wasn't one in the German language before, and now the best-selling books in used bookstores are thick and heavy and large because the German elderly have to buy used books to burn to keep themselves warm in their houses because they can't afford heating bills. They have
Right.
taken an incredibly rich country and torn it apart because if energy spikes and lowers, then the grid can't handle it, and they have to constantly ramp up and down natural gas power plants and send energy overseas. And the solar and wind that was implemented across the whole country cost more than it gains the country, compared to something like solar roofs that go with a battery wall in one house, which when implemented on a small scale kind of efficiently with a battery backup work pretty
Okay.
well.
Great. Okay, so that technology is coming along. I did read that um, in the book Abundance by Diamandis, definitely a book I recommend, that at the time, which was about 10 years ago now, solar was becoming 4 to 6% more efficient per year. So I think those kind of house devices might become useful in one day. But is this rate of burning fossil fuels as they did in Germany before they switched, as we do in industrialized countries, is it sustainable?
So 30 years ago, there were estimates done that roughly 1.7% of all fossil fuels that could ever be found were already used. And that was supposed to be assuming all future reserves, all fossil fuels that would ever be found in the earth. And that was saying 1.7% was used. The current estimate is some 0 point something percent has been used. We find reserves dramatically faster than we use them. If we look at the current extraction rate of oil, gas from the Earth, even in the relatively easy to access areas, it's only something like 35%. There is much, much more fossil fuels in the Earth than we'll need for a very long time. The shale revolution has been massive in this, and no one is saying that we're going to have to use fossil fuels forever. People are just saying fossil fuels are the best choice now. They are what are letting people master and control their environment and make it more livable. And as fossil fuels eventually do run out at some point, hundreds and hundreds of years from now, we can transition over to other sources of energy with, I believe that Anthony might have a different opinion, but my personal preference at the moment being nuclear.
Right. Well, I don't know enough about nuclear. I hear that it's safer than it once was, and I've heard arguments on both sides. If the waste is still dangerous for thousands of years, it seems like to me like an irresponsible choice to saddle people who won't even be here in a couple of for a couple of thousand years with our waste. But I've heard that that's not always the case, and there's other forms of nuclear energy that don't create this waste that's toxic for thousands or tens of thousands of years. Can you comment on that?
So the difficulty in the US is that when you energy, how to say this? So nuclear energy is made from uranium, which has above a certain concentration. Because of its half-life, eventually the concentration of uranium drops, and it then no longer is usable for nuclear energy. However, the way you got the uranium in the first place was by putting it in a centrifuge and distilling it. So what you can do is you can take the nuclear waste that now is too weak, too diluted to use for energy, and you can actually reconcentrate it, put it back in a centrifuge and reuse it, and essentially you will keep using up all of the nuclear waste as more energy. It creates very, very little waste, almost none. The difficulty with this is that when the centrifuge is run to recycle uranium, a very minuscule amount of plutonium is formed. It is dirty plutonium that's not usable, but due to fears in the United States that plutonium can be stolen by a terrorist and used to create nuclear weapons, they have made it illegal to do any recycling of nuclear waste. It is not a nuclear problem. It is a United States government problem. If you look at something like the nuclear power plants in France, they're very energy efficient. They keep reusing their nuclear waste as more fuel, and they aren't putting out that kind of radiation and that radioactive waste.
And what do you suggest is done with the plutonium at the end of the day?
It's a very small amount. It's something that a private company could easily handle storing and getting rid of. I don't remember the exact amount, but it's tiny.
Yeah, but this is just really interesting to me, so I
Mhm.
assume it might be interesting to the audience as well. How long is the waste dangerous for? Do you know?
I'm not sure of its half-life. I do remember there is a few articles looking at the amount of waste and showing that it could even be done things like mixed into water supplies, just because everything has radiation.
Yeah, of course,
If
yeah.
you lie next to someone, they radiate. The amount of plutonium so small that if you like mixed it into a river, it would be less than like the background radiation from the river, and you
Okay,
could just get rid of it that
that
way.
sounds pretty scary, but I'll believe the experts if they say it's safe.
Yeah,
Okay, this is
you don't want to be like standing at the dumping point, but if you're across the river and fishing, you won't like you couldn't even register it on a Gauss meter. And also, people are scared of amounts of background radiation, but it's mostly an unfounded fear. There's a couple different theories of mineral danger. One of the ones that's used by the EPA right now is saying that at very small levels, danger scales linearly for toxic materials. Any amount is dangerous. What's shown to be better proven out in reality is a hormetic effect, where a very small amount of something dangerous is actually beneficial. They've taken like mice and bacteria and isolated them from the radiation coming from the universe. And without this small dose of harmful radiation, they are actually much less healthy and die much faster. The small amount
Right.
of
Okay.
radiation is beneficial.
It would make sense because we evolved on this planet, and we probably evolved for the factors that exist on this planet. So, well, I mean, that's my suspicion anyway.
Yep,
So, I'm going to ask you another question. You might not know the answer, but since we're on a roll here,
go for it.
um, d- do you know why they build nuclear power stations on fault lines like in Japan? I believe that there's a good reason for why they do it, because people would go like, are these people complete fucking idiots? I mean, of anywhere to build a nuclear power station, you wouldn't build it on a fault line, would you? But actually, there's a particular reason why they do it.
I do not know, although I do want to clear up one misunderstanding about the incident in Fukushima. So there was a 9 in the Richter scale earthquake that happened and a tsunami both hit the nuclear power plant, and this is an older nuclear power plant. So this is an absolute worst case scenario. The only thing worse that ever happened was Chernobyl, and Chernobyl is because the Soviet government doesn't care about human life, and they were purposefully trying to see what would happen if we put the nuclear reactor in a danger zone.
Mm.
What happened in Fukushima with this? Do you know how many people died from that meltdown, the problem with the nuclear plant?
I don't know.
0.
Right. Well,
Some people died with the evacuation,
sure.
and down the line, they're still testing to see if there were any radiation long-term cancer deaths. But even with a nuclear power plant that is hit by a 9.0 earthquake and a tsunami, it is still have so few deaths, it's hard to measure them. When you compare that to something like hydroelectric, there was a recent article came out that one of the hydroelectric dams in China
Yeah.
that was covered up, but it killed, I think it was 200,000 or 300,000 people.
Oh, wow, that's shocking if it really is that many.
Yeah, no,
Like,
it
yeah, I
was
mean,
covered
obviously,
up
if
by
a
the
dam burst,
communist
it would be.
government for a while.
Right, yeah, I mean, that would obviously, if a dam burst, that's going to. I think the thing is, I don't know how many people who listen to this show became libertarians from the left and how many came from the right. And I'm starting to think more and more that that's about temperament and that and personality. And so, like, even within libertarians, you get kind of conservative in character people and more sort of liberal in character, more hippie-ish people. And I think amongst hippie-ish people, there's just an instinct that the idea of like using up resources is like, oh, like there's it just feels ick. It just feels like people think of nuclear and they go, oh, I don't like the idea of that, smashing atoms and stuff like that, and oh, it can hurt people, and like there's only a limited amount of it, and are we messing with nature? And these are the kind of like gross feelings that people just don't like the idea of it. So it's very hard to get through our emotional pre-programming, and
An
it's
example that I've heard that I really like is if renewable, like if just having something that renews itself and keeps growing is the answer, what if we had a entirely 100% renewable, never-ending source of fresh drinking water? It is a single pipe. It's on the top of Mount Everest, and it puts out 2 cups a year. It's
right.
renewable. It'll keep putting them out forever, but it's still not useful. It's not
Yeah.
reliable. It's not what we need.
Yes.
And if you look at what the history of humankind, the only resources that we've run out of have been renewables.
Right. Like,
Because we made a lot of animals go extinct. You can renew animals forever, but that doesn't, the resources, something like helium, which is a completely non-renewable gas that disappears into the atmosphere and floats out into space like after you release it,
mm,
we have no problem with it. We're still pulling it out and we're figuring out ways to use it more efficiently as we use it up.
And it is an important point because we have learned to use the fossil fuels more efficiently so that a little goes a long way. I heard a figure, read it in The Rational Optimist, another book that I recommend, that a parked car that was manufactured in the 70s has greater emissions than a car that's manufactured today while it's driving, just through leaks. So we've talked a lot about environmental issues, not so much about the Green New Deal. So let's have a look at what some of the proposals are and talk about the economic implications of them.
So there's three sections to the Green New Deal. One is kind of just overall goals, and I'm going to go through them a little bit, but they're a bit hard to dive into since there's not much depth. So section one, it says, resolved that the House of Representatives that it is the duty of the federal government to create a Green New Deal, A, to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions through a fair and just transaction for all communities and workers, B, to create millions of good, high-wage jobs and ensure prosperity and economic security for all people in the United States, C, to invest in infrastructure and industry, etc., and D, to secure for all people of the U.S. for generations to come clean air and water, climate and community resiliency, healthy food, access to nature, and a sustainable environment. So those already are some pretty ambitious goals. And I especially like how they're saying that it's the duty of the government to make all people of the U.S. now and generations to come have clean water, when, of course, the government messed it up just a little bit in Flint, and their management of the water supply and pricing controls in California are also not doing too
Yeah,
well.
it's an interesting thing because when people think about government anarchism, are you full blown ANCAP? Have you gone full Rothbard?
Oh, yes.
Okay. Well, me too. At least ideologically, I think in terms of pragmatically, I'm a gradual reductionist, but I, I, I'd love to go full Rothbard. So, but
I'm
one of the things, go on.
philosophically, I'm Rothbardian. Pragmatically, I think it's kind of secession is the direction to
Right,
take it more than kind of repealing one law at a time.
right.
Just push the power down and decentralize. Maybe not abolish U.S. government, but at least like put everything we can back on the states and
State
then the
level.
cities and then the people.
I think we need every approach in the toolkit. So I think one of the things it's like agorism, secession, um, gradual reductionism. Any weapon that you can grab, you should be lobbing it at the state. But one of the things that most people would think, it's funny that people say, how would we build the roads rather than, well, how would people get clean drinking water? Because I think that's more of a fundamental thing. Well, that's one thing that everyone agrees the government should do. But it's interesting because many times government has um, prosecuted people from harvesting rain off their own roof. You can Google it. What's more to the point, it's if you were an environmentalist, why do you want all these pipes going under the ground everywhere and anywhere? Don't you want local? Um, yeah, like rain harvesting. It's about making people independent and things like that. I was reading again. This was in the Diamandis book. They were creating a toilet for third world countries that didn't need that actually recycled the waste from people's bodies into fertilizer, and they could burn the poop, and it created enough energy to to light an LED light bulb. So um, the interesting thing about that is this is the kind of technology that would have been developed decades ago if the government didn't give everyone piping water. Now, like you said, in California, also in many places in England, you get droughts and things like that where the government has to come round and say, please don't flush your toilet so much. Please don't take a bath, just take a shower. The market would sort this out. You know, if people were actually paying according to their usage, then if the price went up too much, then new people would move in and start finding ways to supply them with water, so the
They
supply would
have
increase. Yeah, go
they
on.
have issues where they have grandfathered in clauses where a lot of agricultural groups in
That's another point.
California get priority use of the water. They
Yes,
pay a small fine for using too much, but that fine's nowhere near a big enough cost to actually make them use less of it. They'll even sell the water back to other people. And if you want to see an example of kind of free market water in action, you can look at Israel. It's a
right.
desert country. It should have no drinking water, and all the people around it are kind of against it. They have not only developed machines to just pull water straight out of the air, but they have some of the most effective filtration systems in the world. Like water is in terms of use resources that we use up, it's one that it's relatively easy to reacquire if we have enough just energy and human ingenuity. And really, human ingenuity is the ultimate resource in terms of, because every single thing in the ground 100, 200 years ago was useless to us. Oil used to be a thing that spoiled crops. A bunch of things just couldn't be harvested or used in any way. Resources aren't found in nature. The human mind takes the difficulty and tyranny of nature and makes it into resources to make our nice, comfortable houses where we can speak across the world through a Skype connection for free.
Right. And how amazing it is, how amazing the innovations of the human mind are and have been that we enjoy. So let's
And I,
go through, go on.
and I forgot one other point actually in the duty of the federal government, because it was so big I thought it was another section. This one's a bit of a humdinger of just word salad. Duty of the federal government to create a new Green Deal to promote justice and equality by stopping current, preventing future, and repairing historic oppression of indigenous people, communities of color, migrant communities, deindustrialized communities, depopulated rural communities, the poor, low-income workers, women, the elderly, the unhoused, people with disabilities, and youth.
Who could be against that?
Well, they literally list every single group except for white males.
All right, okay. But do they need an actual group for white males? Is it not just, yeah.
It'd be shorter to like say
I
not
think that
white
I
males.
think the most of white males probably can find themselves fitting into one of those categories anyway if they try hard enough. They're either
Yeah.
going to be youth, or they're going to be old, or they're going to be poor. But like,
Well, and also anything from a depopulated rural community and any deindustrialized community. No, it covers pretty much everyone except like even a small, small group of white males. And somehow these groups are the oppressed minority
well,
relative to
okay,
this
so
tiny
so it's
group of
almost
elites.
everyone, almost everyone is a minority, basically.
Yeah.
So let's go through these five broad headings just one more time that you shared with us, and we can just each comment on them briefly, and then we'll wrap up.
So you wanted to go through the next section because that was kind of
Oh,
just the duty of what they wanted to do. There's a few
okay.
more.
Let's go
So
for it. What did you
okay.
highlight?
So the next session is especially fun because this is not just goals, but the things that need to be achieved within 10 years.
Oh, wow.
So, um, let's see where to go with this. They're going to repair and upgrade all of the infrastructure in the US to do, of course, universal access to clean water. And let's see, meeting 100% of the power demand in the United States through clean, renewable, and zero emission energy sources to to build and upgrade energy efficient and smart power grids, to upgrade all existing buildings in the United States and building new buildings to maximize energy efficiency, water efficiency, and so on. So within 10 years, they will have upgraded all buildings in the United States. It's pretty
Yeah,
impressive.
it's an interesting thing with the insulated buildings as well, because I found this out from first-hand experience a few years ago, staying in an apartment with my girlfriend at the time, and we had um, we discovered that behind our bed there was a whole bunch of mold. So what the thing is, in order to get the buildings to be completely insulated, the new kinds of buildings, you basically have to make it so that air doesn't escape. And what happens is that because so that the heat can't escape. The old buildings used to breathe, and when they breathed, they'd you'd prevent things like this mold creeping into your walls. And then, of course, there you think that you're saving the environment, but then you're going to have what might happen around your windows is the frame might get all moldy, and then that will need to be replaced using a bunch of resources. The wall might need to be pulled down, and new wood needs to be put into the wall now, or whatever. So, you try if it was energy efficient to insulate houses on a free market, they will get the kind of insulating that is safe because otherwise, it's a cost benefit analysis. Is it going to cost me more resources to have a house that doesn't breathe and then have to replace a bunch of panels in 10 years because they get all moldy, or is it going to be more efficient to my pocketbook to just pay a little bit more for energy? And we'd have real prices on energy. The prices would reflect the scarcity of resources, and that would create an incentive to insulate or not, or otherwise, depending on how scarce the resources were.
So there's been arguments made by a number of economists historically where they said that essentially their argument was the average person is too stupid to make long-term cost benefit calculations. That's
But the
actually the
government
original
is
reason
capable.
for that's the original reason for cafe fuel economy standards. Was it wasn't even about pollution. It was just, hey, people are going to buy cars that look really cheap now but are really expensive down the road. When they actually research this in psychological economic literature, it turns out people are actually really, really good at making these decisions. And it's just that government officials assume we're all idiots and that we can't make these long-term decisions ourselves.
Can
And
you throw out
humans are
any
pretty good at it.
sources for the data? Because in one of my favorite podcasts that I did when I flew solo, which was called Why Markets Work, Public versus Private, I talked about these kinds of things that economists say, like whatever, people can go and check it out if they like. And you seem to have some studies that contradict what economists say about how dumb people are. And I'm not surprised
So
because people go to great lengths to research their dishwasher to get a cheap, not just a cheap one to buy, but one that's going to be cheap to run. People do actually look it up online to find out what dishwasher or washing machine to buy.
I'm pulling that research from talks by Alex Epstein from the Center for Industrial Progress.
Okay.
And I'm actually planning to, when I have my document ready to go, and I might actually even get published this article for Actual Anarchy, I'm going to send it to Center for Industrial Progress to make sure I'm
Yes.
quoting them correctly.
Yes.
Apparently, he is very responsive to emails and loves to be on podcasts. He doesn't even ask for donations. He just asks for people to spread the message of his organization, which is an amazing one. And I think you can contact him at alex@industrialprogress.com, I believe is his website. I believe is
People
his
can
email
double
to contact
check.
him. Yeah.
So yeah, and he's a randist, an objectivist, a card-carrying objectivist. He says it loud and says it proud. So selfish bastard. Right.
Yep.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit more about the Green New
Okay.
Deal.
So what's another fun one? There's a lot of sections in it about working with farmers, both where it says the government's going to promote healthy food, and it also says that in the next 10 years, the government will work collaboratively with farmers and ranchers to remove pollution and greenhouse gas emissions from the agricultural sector as much as possible by supporting family farming, investing in sustainable farming, and building a more sustainable food system. So, with that, there's a couple things beyond just it being more efficient to grow food far away
Yeah,
sometimes.
yeah,
There's an
totally.
interesting book called The Localvore's Dilemma, which goes through the economics of how people's nutrition has improved dramatically when we stopped trying to have people in cold Arctic regions grow all their own food.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, and I talk about it in Universal Basic Income for and Against, my first book on economics. In the section on free trade, it can. So it'd be like, do you know what? It'd be really nice if the government just stopped subsidizing farmers. You know, that might actually just be really good, because then
that'd be
maybe,
amazing.
yeah, maybe we could just import our food from poor places so that those poor places can get rich, and then those people can get up out of a like, I get really annoyed at these kind of misanthropic myths like, oh, if they get rich, then they're going to compete with us. It's like, no, actually what happens is they get in, when economies get rich, people work in ideas instead of on like farms and factories. And when they work in ideas, they invent things that benefit everyone in the whole world. It would be great for us if Africa had a first world standard of living, because they'd be they'd be inventing all sorts of inventions and things like that that we could make use of. So it's like this kind of like, I just think that the subsidization of food in America, it's terrible. And the tariffs, they're terrible for poor Americans as well, because they can't import cheap ass food from abroad. It'd be really
and
great to be able to.
they're often especially going for some of the unhealthiest food, subsidizing really bad corn oils or removing things like hemp, which actually was
Oh yeah,
both a better food source in many ways and was also a much better, like it was an actual functional biofuel source that the
right.
US military during World War II, the soldiers' uniforms made of hemp, the tanks ran on hemp ethanol. Like we had a hemp army back then. Now it's legal and banned.
And
And
it's
with that, we also have stuff like, if I know you're from not from the U.S., but there's some insane stuff about U.S. sugar policy in the past. I believe the Dangerous History podcast has a whole 2 or 3 part series about it, where it's literally gang members came from overseas and took over the U.S. sugar industry with essentially slave labor. And then we still have such crazy tariffs. The U.S. pays twice as much as the rest of the world for sugar. And even beyond that, healthy food is essentially available to all Americans, but people have different preferences and subjective rankings of what they value. People don't want to always eat healthy food. This is really just a savior complex from the government, especially when many of the government officials that signed on to this probably aren't that healthy.
no. And Lord, can this government just save us from ourselves and our own lack of willpower? Well, I don't think the government's the right tool for the job. So, and I just add to that from an environmental perspective, if you do believe that global warming is man-made and that it's potentially catastrophic, hemp is one of the fastest CO2 to biomass converters. It grows incredibly quickly, sucking CO2 out of the atmosphere, and can also put nutrients back into the soil. It's good for crop rotation. So when you want to restore a forest, say that has not been a forest for a long time, it's good to grow hemp first before trying to replant the forest in some cases. The
And if
stuff
you
I
want
read.
to and if you want to grow back forest, it's really simple. Provide fossil fuels. Every single country that has reached an industrial level of something near like Chile or higher has had a greening.
Right, that's
Starting in the
right.
1950s, deforestation reversed. The rainforest in like the Amazon is doing very well. It's not really a danger. It's just a myth.
That's good to know. Okay. Phew. We rolled a hard 6 on that one, a hard 7
Yeah, I
rather
know.
on
I've been to the Amazon rainforest and it's amazing. Like I'm very happy it's not going away, and I'm angry that people are freaking out. Like the only group that was in danger of tearing down the Amazon rainforest is when the Brazilian government
Yeah,
had a centralized tyrannical power that wanted to build a bridge to the Amazon.
Right, okay, yeah, it's not surprising when government gets involved. Another point is they didn't really have secure property rights, so a charity couldn't just go there and buy up the rainforest and say, well, we own this, so you can't cut it down. They would cut it down anyway because the government wasn't going to defend the charity's property claim to the forest. Okay, let's see if we can hack through.
There are a couple others in the 10-year plan. Just
That sounds
re-
ominously like the
but
5-year plan.
yeah, no, but lots of things about restoring fragile ecosystems and removing hazardous waste, all like cleaning up all hazardous waste sites and abandoned sites within 10 years to allow new sustainability. But I think I might actually jump into the long term stuff
Before
because
you do,
that's
I think,
interesting.
would it be exaggerating or unfair to just say that this whole proposal is like, wouldn't it be amazing if we could just use the government, wave the government like a magic wand and turn the world full of rainbows and unicorns and pixies? Is that
It I think you're underestimating it. It's not wave the magic wand and turn the world into pixies. It's wave the government like a magic wand and turn the world into pixies. And if we don't do it, we're all dead in 10 years.
okay? Okay,
So
so it's
it's
carrot and stick,
carrot
right?
and stick, and the carrot's made of gold, and the stick is uranium.
All right. Well, plutonium actually.
Oh yeah, plutonium, even more dangerous. Um, I will also note for the funding of the Green New Deal, um, they've done an amazing job of deflecting from any question about funding.
Right, of
They
course.
really, whenever it's brought up, they say, well, how do we fund World War II and how do we fund all this like other military stuff? And however we fund that is how we're going to fund this. And they're really leaning heavily on the MMT, the Modern Monetary Theory group, with whose argument is essentially because the government prints their own money, they can never default, so we can just print as much money as we want to pay for whatever we want. I'm badly oversimplifying their theory. It is much more complex and nuanced, but the way that politicians use their theory is essentially the government prints the money, we can spend everything as much as we want. Robert Murphy has done some excellent work on this, both on his blog on Mises.org and at the Contra Krugman podcast. Um, that's worth noting that they are literally saying, oh, we'll just print money to pay for it.
Okay.
So for the long term things, it's of course we need to provide resources, training, and education, much more public investment, and we're just going to help all of these poor economies build up by giving them the money to implement the Green New Deal policies. They also do say they will guarantee a family sustaining wage for everyone, strengthen and protect the rights of all workers to organize, unionize, collectively bargain, and strengthen and enforcing labor, workplace health and safety, anti-discrimination, and wage and hour standards across all employers, industry, and sectors. The long-term parts it gets into is doing a little bit less with the environment stuff and just the full progressive wish list of everything they could ever ask for just got tacked on at the end.
Right. Yeah, and it's important that people realize, because especially now with automation, even people who are skeptical of things like the UBI think the government should be spending tons of money retraining people. What they don't understand is that the government doesn't know what to train people in. Like, who knows? The only people who know how to train people and what to train people in are employers and businesses that are successful.
I
All
would
of
even
their
throw in there, I would say that you're not being harsh enough. If you have you do you know of Brian Kaplan, the case against
before you go
education?
on, just let me say that all the labor laws that they propose, including the living wage and the controls which will make employing people more expensive, deter businesses from taking people on and training them, because I'm not going to spend $20 on your $15 wage and $5 complying to with the labor laws, plus probably another $4 per hour on your health insurance, making it cost me $24 or more to employ you, to train you, because you're not making me any money whatsoever while you're training. So if the economy is to adapt, people think in precarious times the government needs to come in to help people adapt to the changes in the economy. It's when it's precarious times that you need the market to be as free as possible to allow people to adapt. And you're going to talk about Brian Kaplan's book, The
Yeah.
Case Against Education.
Yeah, I think that the government entirely fails in its free education efforts. That even if we assumed that there was a role to re-educate people, what the government has done to re-educate people is a terrible way to do it. If we want to allow transfer between jobs as necessary to help the economy, the real way to do it is to remove the minimum wage.
That's it.
The Forgotten Depression, that covers the Great Depression in 1931, which no one's ever heard of, is excellent. Essentially, there was a depression on the same scale as the Great Depression. I said wrong year. 1921. There was a depression on the same scale as the Great Depression, similar decrease in the stock market and everything else, but the government did nothing, and wages were allowed to drop, and the depression was over within a year and a half. Compared to the 1929 Great Depression, where Herbert Hoover, an extreme interventionist in the economy, held wages high and worked with business leaders to hold wages high so people could not adjust, and the economy took over a decade to recover. If you want to allow people to transfer between jobs, make it cheaper for employers to hire people and fire people so they're not scared to hire someone new.
Great stuff. Thank you, Drake, for joining me. Before you go, is there anything that we should be looking at doing for the environment?
Reusing as materials is always a good thing to do. Reducing your personal waste. There is some issues with the recycling system as it exists in most countries. Industrial level recycling is done very, very well because they have uniform byproducts, but that's not really in your realm of control. If you want to improve the environment around people, you should advocate for using our best, most reliable, cheapest source of energy in the moment, because people in the world are legitimately suffering from dangerous environments. People in sub-Saharan African countries are getting heat stroke. They are dying due to too much exposure. I think it's 2 million people a year, mostly women and children, die to exposure from smoke from burning fires in their houses to stay
Yes.
warm. If we want to help those people, it's not through preventing climate change, it's through getting them energy here and now. I don't care about temperature being 1 degree cooler a year from now. I care about getting that burning person an air conditioner tomorrow and getting them water. And we do that through fossil fuels, and later maybe through nuclear, through whatever energy source comes next, which the free market will find.
And we can, add to that the wealth that we gain from using fossil fuels will help us research and create the next revolution in energy. I should just also add the concept of the Kuznets curve, the environmental Kuznets curve, which I can't remember the figure, but I think they say countries tend to become more conscious of their environmental impact and spend more money addressing environmental issues when they gain an income of, if I remember it correctly, about $6,000 or $7,000 dollars, and it's $1,000 per capita. And it makes sense if you think about it, because poor places can't actually afford to defoul their water. They can afford to put recycling infrastructure into place. They can't afford, they just I mean, I've been to India several times, and you see it, just trash thrown outside. Sometimes they burn piles of trash, including a lot of plastic. It's poor, people cannot be conscious. They're just trying to scrape out a living. Once people are wealthy, then they become, or they can't afford to replant their forests, say. Once they become more wealthy, they've got the resources, and people do care about their environment. I mean, we are organisms. We're in a deep relationship with the environment. If the environment is poisonous, we die. So I think that a lot of this green stuff, I'm very in favor of environmentalism, but I can't say that I am in the popular form of it, which I fear is too much driven by um, emotion and not enough by reason and evidence. Do you have anything to add?
No, it just if that I completely agree. If you want to improve everything, including the environment, it's by making the poor wealthy, and capitalism has been the thing to do it.
Okay, thanks again, Drake. Lovely to have you in the Scottish Liberty podcast, and just tell people where they can follow your work.
Um, I don't. I had my own site for a bit, and it turned out that it was not. It didn't make sense to keep it up for myself. I occasionally contribute to actualanarchy.com. You can, if you search Young Americans Liberty University of Cincinnati, you can find some of my old debates on various
Great.
topics. And anything from Freedom Toons is highly recommended.
Yes, and if people have a question to ask you, well, I guess they can find you on Facebook. So thanks very
Yep,
much for joining me. Hopefully speak again sometime.
anytime.
Ta-ta.